You're listening to Solera Innovation Labs, where automotive experts from around the world discuss technology trends in mobility and debate tomorrow's rules of the road. Whether you're a technician, a dealer, an appraiser, a car lover, or anything in between, we'll discuss topics that will keep you up to date and help you and your business win.
Hello, everyone. I'm here today not as the host of Don's Drive-In, but as the host to a special segment here on Solera Innovation Labs. We're featuring an international topic today and speaking with someone outside the United States to get a global perspective on the industry. I'm joined today by Gethyn Davies, who is the head of bodyshop commercial development with Audatex UK. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
Hi, how are you?
Well, doing great. We appreciate you joining us today. And why don't we do this, and if you don't mind, give our listeners a little background on your expertise and your experience within the industry, and then we'll dive into some questions.
Yeah, that'd be great. I look forward to it. Thank you. So I started in the industry at the start of the 1990s, and I joined a distribution business, very well established, over 120 years old at the time, but actually owned by an American corporation, Dana.
And that distribution business, was that parts? Was it materials? What was it in the collision space?
Yeah, so they actually started off as a cycle spares business in the 19th century, then got about building cars, and eventually moved into distributing spares for vehicles, and that included paint and associated materials, as well as aftermarket parts, tools, equipment, retail for retail automotive aftercare shops. So it was a pretty broad introduction into the entire automotive aftermarket for me, which was fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you were with that organization for how long?
So I worked there for 6 or 7 years, and then there was a bit of a change in strategy for Dana. They decided to sell off that division of the business, and I didn't particularly care for the new owners of the business, and decided to get a job working for ICI, which was a really significant paint manufacturer. Their automotive refinish brand was called ICI Autocolor, which some of your listeners may have used back in the day. And I joined them as an area sales manager and really spent a couple of years doing that, which was great. Recharged my batteries. Then got a job with marketing just as the business was acquired by PPG Industries. Again, another American company. So you can see how much experience I've got with American corporates. And really, I progressed my career through there for a few years, couple of years in marketing, then took over as head of major accounts and technical services, then led ironically, the acquisition for the Brown Brothers business, which PPG brought into their fold. So they have their own UK distribution business for paint and materials. Very different business to the one I'd left a few years before, but one that we turned around and made successful, which I'm very proud of. And really, I ran Brown Brothers as the managing director and PPG Industries UK and Ireland for 8 or 9 years before leaving a couple of years ago to set up my own business, helping smaller body shops secure discounts on genuine parts. And it was while I was doing that, about 18 months later, I approached Solera, or Audatex as they're known in the UK, to try and bulk purchase some assessment volumes for my customers, which they politely declined to do, but said, hey, we've got this new body shop management product there. Come and have a look at it. We'd like you to do a bit of consultancy for us. And I went and had a look, and I was quite smitten. But after about 2 or 3 days working, realised that a consultant wasn't going to be enough, and they needed really somebody to head the project up. And they offered me the job. And that's been my life for the last sort of 14 or 15 months.
Well, that's great. And it's an interesting background. So I'm going to ask a couple more questions about it because it sounds like from the distribution side of things, not only from parts to equipment, but then it came into the paint line. And it sounds like you spent a considerable amount of time in the industry. When I say that, meaning going in and out of shops, right? These repairers, the body shops, if you will, right? So you spent time with the mechanics, the technicians, the shop owners, especially when you were in the paint side of the house, I would imagine. And that's how you learned a lot more expertise on how to drive some of the topics we're going to talk about today, which is how some small changes in these shops can drive better profitability for them, and push them in a direction to increase their value as business owners. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. So I think with I was very lucky actually when I worked for Brown Brothers, when I became branch manager at the tender age, or shop manager at the tender age of around 24 or 25. It was almost like being a mini vice president of your own business. So, I spent probably a year looking at the shop that I ran and getting it running the way that I felt it should do, which then freed up time for me to just go out and see my customers and really become the business development guy for my shop. And one of the interesting things is, certainly in the UK, lots and lots of businesses, whether they're sort of the service, maintenance, or repair sector, or whether they're body shops, a lot of them are just really clever entrepreneurial people who've come up from the shop floor, who've perhaps got less formal education than people who work in big business, but
sure,
against some quite tough odds, they survive. It's because they're clever at making money and looking after their customers. And the great thing is, if you're visiting 3 or 4 shops a day, 4 days a week, you actually quite quickly build up an idea of what works, what doesn't work, and get into a position where actually you can start to add some value for your customers in terms of saying, yeah, I recognize that's a problem. Have you guys ever thought about approaching it this way? Or have you ever thought about approaching it that way? And, some people take your advice, some people don't. Some people try and it doesn't work, and some people try it and say, wow, actually this guy might have another piece of good advice for me, so I'm going to go back and chat some more for him. Right. And I think I was able to build on that when ICI really brought in a strategy to say, if we're visiting a customer and we're not adding value to their business, we probably shouldn't bother being there. And that was really a philosophy that I've taken through me with my career. And to talk to salespeople who talk about going to see a customer, and it was about account management, having a cup of tea and discussing last night's soccer, and perhaps taking a packet of biscuits in so all the staff loved them, and then be really disappointed a few months later when somebody else went in there who could add some value to the business and stole the paint business. So I've always, really believed if we're not adding value for our customers and everything that we do, then we've got no right to expect to retain the business with that customer.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I come from a shop background myself, and not just necessarily from a technician side, but so I do have some formal business education and upbringing, but and I built solutions that kind of looked at those gaps, these minor changes or small changes that can be made, and how to maximize those to generate more profitability for my businesses. And we had 28 of them at one point in time, 28 collision repair centers. And so it's interesting. So talking about small changes, there's a question, and you may know the answer to this, and some of the savvy people listening probably know this, but if I gave you a penny and told you that it would double in value every day, or I gave you $1 million up front, which do you choose? And so it's interesting when you say that. So I give you a second to kind of think about that for a minute, because I think some people will go, man, I want the $1 million, right? Because they get $1 million up front. But what you don't realize, if you take a penny and it doubles every day, right? 31 days from from that first day, you'll have $10 million instead of just $1 million. I mean, the example here is really simple in the fact that these small little changes that you bring to the shops, no matter how significant they are, they add up. And it's really what that example says, right? And it's quite interesting. And that being said, as you start to get a multitude of these little small wins in your organization or shop, it grows, it multiplies, meaning that you start to see as you get 10, 15, 20 of these little small things, your money starts to really grow faster as you start to get the economy of that scale, right? Because you're making so many of these small little changes, they add up so quickly. So that being said, and I make that example, Gethyn, tell us some of the small changes body shops can do now to improve kind of the repair process, make a difference in their business. What are the kind of things that Audatex UK are helping cultivate with the shops in your neck of the woods?
So probably the number one is really about the accuracy of the assessment. If we go back to the good old days or the bad old days, we could see variations in the assessment that I guess you guys call it an estimator. We tend to have this posh grand title now, the VDA or the vehicle damage assessor. But they use some kind of computerized estimating system now, which is brilliant and really efficient and allows them to capture lots and lots of detail around the job. But I think one of the problems is if you're not given enough time to use what is essentially a calculator, or you try and use that to assess actually how you should repair the vehicle, you start missing out on lots and lots of small things, a few minutes here, a few minutes there, and nut and bolt. And actually, you'll still do the activity when you complete the job. You'll still fit the nut and the bolt. You just won't be charging for it. And all of a sudden, probably on a profit margin that isn't as high as some other industries, what you're actually doing now is you start to introduce some work or some parts free of charge, and it might only be a bulb, it might be a quart of antifreeze, but actually all of these things again are little things that when you take them across all of the jobs that any shop's doing, the improvement can be dramatic.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting you say it. Look, when I had my 28 repair centers, and I'm going to bring up a very valid point you just made. I think you're spot on, right? It's the quality of that assessment or that estimate that's written. And when we talk about it, you drill it down. And you brought up a nut and a bolt. We had in my shop what we referred to as a nut and bolt bin. Okay, so the technicians, as you disassemble a car, you don't always have every nut and bolt, right, because of the way that car was damaged. They may be missing from the accident. So when you go to reassemble, you need clips and nuts and bolts. So we would stock this huge section, right, with all these drawers of all the different nuts and bolts and clips you can have. And we were spending anywhere between $500 to $600 a month just on nuts and bolts, right? Yeah. Little things. But when you talk about the assessment or that estimate, you're talking about making sure that those things are included. Those are chargeable. You should be able to recoup that. And shops get so busy at times, right, with what's going on that they overlook some of these small little things that add up, right? And that's one of those examples that you just brought up, right?
Absolutely. And I think if we just briefly go back to your, do we take 1 cent a day that doubles for 31 days, or do we take the $1 million? There's a couple of things about that story that's really interesting. The first one is, who's going to come and offer you $1 million? And the truth is, not very often does that happen to us. So it's very rare that we can go into a business and go, if you just change that one thing there, that's what will take you from losing money or breaking even or making a tiny profit to making a huge profit. Because if it was so big and so obvious, you'd already have done that. And again, you're absolutely spot on. People go, well, I've got, 3, 5, 10 vehicles that I've got to assess today. I've got to get an estimate out for the repair of the vehicles. I'm missing somebody on reception, so my estimator needs to try and help out on reception. And me as the boss, I can't help out because I've got to deliver a vehicle or I've got to get my hands dirty today. So we rush through, and the amount of things that can be missed are fairly significant. And I think, again, if we go back to that cent doubling every day story, so, yeah, that's great. We've got this magic cent. But actually, if you don't double that on just 5 out of those 31 occasions, you would have been better off taking the £1 million. So when you've got those little changes, like you said, you make several of them, but then you've got to make sure that every single day, every single assessment, you've got checks and balances in place and make sure that those little things become driven onto the job.
Yeah, it's got to become a standard operating procedure, is what I would say, right?
Absolutely right.
You have to ingrain this as a muscle, right? It's funny because you start to say this and we talk about the nuts and bolts. I even talk about collision repair procedures, right? There are procedures that when you look at these very sophisticated estimating systems, they're great and they're very efficient, but they can't incorporate all of those things. And so the more knowledgeable you are as an appraiser or a damage assessor, and understanding all the procedures necessary to do the repair, you can make sure that all those things are accounted for in your estimate. An example of that can be caulk, right? There's caulking that's done on a vehicle, or commonly referred to as Q pads. These are padding that's put inside doors and quarter panels to create sound deadening that people they overlook or don't know it's there. And the funny thing is you will know that technician in the back, he's going to go put it back the way it is. He goes and gets those things and he puts them on the car. And so that muscle and ingraining this in order to obviously drive some small little changes is how are you having that technician come back to your damage assessor and let them know that these things were added to it if you missed it when you wrote the assessment. And so that's why it's so vital to get it up front, right?
And that's an interesting question as well, John. How do you do that? When I play golf very badly in the few lessons that I've had, the instructors always say, you've got to groove your swing. You have to get where that becomes second nature. That's where, as you said, your standard operating procedure comes in. But actually, when your technician goes to get the sound deadening pad or the door film, actually, he's got to have a way of communicating to your estimator. You haven't got that part on there. So not only do we want to charge for the part, actually we need to re-estimate the labour because it's a legitimate operation on that job we're doing that's going to earn us a few minutes labour that we're going to do because we want the car repaired to the right standard. So therefore, it's only right and proper that we should charge for doing that operation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, in the States, we hear, and then maybe you guys are doing this in the UK where you're at, they refer to it as what they call the blueprint. So I may do that appraisal, right? Damage assessment up front. And then when the vehicle finally comes into the repair shop, we'll dismantle and continue to make sure we find all the hidden damage and parts that can't be visually seen at the time of the assessment to ensure we have the proper blueprint and repair procedures to kind of move forward with that through the process. And those things, when it's ingrained as a muscle in the shop, it speeds up that process, which now creates, again, a small change. I can now process more vehicles. Why can you process more vehicles? Because it streamlines its process through the shop and out the back door in a timely, efficient manner with no delays, right? So now I can get more output. So, well, look.
And of course, it's about what's our procedure as well to do that, because it's all very well as saying we're going to capture, 8 minutes and a $5 sound deadening pad. That's a great job. But actually, if it's taken the technician 10 minutes when he's not working on or she's not working on the car, walking around looking for the shop foreman, looking for the estimator, looking for the partsman, looking for the storeman. So what have we built into that standard operating procedure to make sure that the technician's got a really simple process to be able to get that information across to the relevant people so that they can carry on working on the job.
Yeah.
You know, in the body shop management system that I've been rolling out over my last few months with Audatex, we have an app. So the technician can literally take a photo, write a note, press a button, and it automatically goes to the relevant people in the business, and they can carry on working. And we're just launching a product actually in the UK now called Image Capture, which essentially allows a technician to do the same thing on their phone, so they can actually capture additional damage, make a note, press a button that automatically goes into the AAG assessment, which is looked for by license plate number, and then the notes go into a portal so that the estimator can use those notes to build up the story for the engineer to make sure that job gets authorised with the correct amount of labour and parts on it.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge thing you bring up. I mean, what's interesting about technology and shop management, if you will, and you brought up to me a phenomenal point. It is so much is spent on kind of the front office, right? Writing the assessment, managing the parts, all those things, and we forget about the technician or the mechanic working on the vehicle, right? And so with that technology that allows that communication, you bridge a gap that exists in shops today, right? And
hugely.
It's a huge gap, and it's not just where you're at; that's in the States as well. So it's awesome that you guys have gone down that path and worked through that. You know, one of the other things that I was going to ask you about is the parts side of the house. So we got this communication going on with the technician back to the assessor and making sure everything's accounted for. Talk about how parts and the procurement improve not only that cycle time, but some of the incremental gains you get because of those efficiencies that you guys have experienced with maybe this shop management, even in your consultative days.
Yeah, so I guess, you know, the first thing is what parts do we want to order? And it seems like an obvious question, but on probably virtually every job that we look at, we're going to come across particularly a panel or a headlamp or a radiator, and we need to make a decision on should we purchase a replacement or should we repair what we've got. If we capture the right images of that part before we start the repair, during the repair, and when the repair is completed, which again with mobile phones is so quick and easy to do, and with some of the modern miracle pull systems and that kind of thing, we can repair a panel. We can make more money from repairing the panel than purchasing the panel, and save either the car driver or the insurance company, whoever's paying that bill. We can save them money. That's a win. And do you know what? If we're not massively busy in our body shop, we're at a quiet time, perhaps during the summer vacation, perhaps it's better to keep our labour occupied doing that kind of thing rather than just asking them to fit a panel, which will take them a third of the time of actually repairing it.
Well, there's also some truth to the fact that, and not to interrupt, but there's the truth to the fact that if I can repair, let's say, a quarter panel on a vehicle, as opposed to cutting out the back glass, cutting it off your car. So there's so many things that need to be taken into consideration in a replacement versus a repair, right? It's also the quality of the repair that can be taken into consideration. So there's so many people that go, I want a new quarter panel on my car. And then when you start to explain, well, yeah, I can do that, but I'm going to cut out the back glass and I have to open up the trunk. I'm cutting all this apart. It's understanding what is going to be appropriate, where maybe with a pull on the frame, the quarter pops out and it's a better repair. So, it makes perfect sense. And
also, of course, all the original OE anti-corrosion properties of that vehicle being dipped in various tanks of electropaint and electroprimers, that with the best will in the world, we will do everything to try and match on refinish. But wherever you've got two bits of metal that touch, you'll never replicate 100% that. And I think it's a really important point you make there. I would always, as long as I can get the job looking 100% like you, I'd always rather somebody repaired a quarter panel for me than fitted a new panel.
Yeah, and you're right. You use your labor and you get efficiency. So, hey, what we're going to do, Gethyn, is we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after this message.
Solera Innovation Labs is a podcast produced by Solera, a global leader in data-driven solutions and services. Solera collects and translates complex data into actionable insights for automotive, identity, and property partners across 90 countries and counting. Learn more at solera.com or find us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
Well, welcome back, everyone. We're in the middle of a discussion with some of the basic and really meaningful changes that the body shop businesses can make to improve, their profitability, the bottom line, however you want to say it. We have Gethyn Davies from the UK, so we have a special guest as we're continuing to have an international topic today. And we were talking about parts before the break, and I want to continue down the parts and maybe even the material side of things, because I think, Gethyn, correct me if I'm wrong, but as you start to go do the shops and look at this, not only is it the part side, but with those parts can be even the materials. We talked about caulk, we talked about corrosion. You mentioned that up, right? The factory stuff. What are some of the other things that the shops should be considering as they start to look at some of these small changes to drive profitability when it comes to parts and materials?
So I think on parts, we've talked about being able to use or perhaps repair a part. Of course, ultimately, what we purchased the part for is going to make an impact onto our bottom line. And I guess with different vehicle manufacturers come different discounts. We can get very comfortable dealing with people. Again, with shops are busy. We get very comfortable dealing with the same suppliers. When was the last time you did a check? Because the market moves. And that actually applies to your materials as well.
Yes.
If we're coming to we've got a big smash job in where we might have, a couple of $1,000 of parts on the job. Actually, do we make sure we make some extra effort on those jobs to phone up different suppliers? How quick you get the parts is likely to be slightly less crucial on a job like that. But actually getting a couple of % extra discount on those parts, again, will have a big impact or a relatively big impact on the bottom line. It'll be one of those things that we need to look at. And of course, the big thing, and you'll have to cut me off mid-flow here, Tom, because I could stand on in my pulpit and preach about this. The difference in consumption on, for example, paint or on dry goods can be massive. You go from one shop to another shop.
It's funny. You get on your pulpit about it. I'm going to give you a quick and funny story that I think, coming from your background, right, with ICI, Autocolor, right, it goes into PPG. When I had my shops, we went from the solvent to water, right? And when we did that, you go through and you do all your training on it, and the coverage of solvent versus the coverage on waterborne paint, at least in the States, right, where those products are considerably different. And the manufacturer we were with, did all the training of all our people. And we roll this out, and we're finding that first of all, that the solvent cost was less than obviously the waterborne cost for materials. And after about a month, I'm looking at my bill for materials, right? And it is through the roof. I mean, it is almost double what it used to be on the solvent side. I'm freaking out, right, as a business owner.
Yeah.
Number one. Two, you start listening to all the shops, and they're complaining about how long it's taken to dry. Well, what do you think the problem was? Right? They were pounding the product on to get coverage. And it is amazing that impact. So it is a significant thing that you say when you talk about how much material they put on a vehicle, right? I mean, it's huge. And do you feel that with the new technology, I'm sorry, they're putting the sensors under some of the bumper covers today, and they're saying that you can only have so many mils of paint in order for them to function properly. So there's a lot more of a conscious effort, at least what we're seeing here in the States. So I'd be curious to see what you have in the UK about the mils of paint buildup on a part in order to make sure that some of these ADAS components are functioning properly. What are you guys experiencing? Is it similar?
Yeah, exactly the same. So the ADAS or ADAS, as we call it over here, is having a significant impact on repair cost, the recalibration. The people who put too much paint on and the sensors can't be recalibrated in exactly the way that you sense makes a huge difference. So, how many body shops then go, well, we know, this is a VW Golf and it's got LiDAR and radar and sensors all over it. So we know this is going to be a problem. So we're just going to replace the bumper. When actually they need the correct method. As you say, they need to know how much paint to take off. They need to have a view on how much paint they put back on there. They need to have a way of measuring that. Not always easy on plastic, but again, that paint manufacturer or paint supplier would be able to help them with that. So I think, again, really important point you make there. The other thing, I was just smiling when you were telling me the story about your paint costs shooting up with the move from solvent-borne to waterborne, because I think there'll be lots of people listening to this nodding, going, "Yep, we have exactly the same thing." And I remember one of my technicians who worked for us at PPG proudly telling me how he'd gone in and showed them how to set up the gun, dry the base coat between coats, or at least flash it off for longer so the coverage was improved, how to use the correct primers underneath. And he said, I showed them on a job how to mix it was over 30% less material. And I said, wow, that's fantastic. I knew the owner of the shop, and I happened to be in there the next month, and I said, well, you must be really, really pleased with us. We've improved your usage of material, base coat material by a third. It must be saving you a huge sum of money. And he flipped to his account and he said, I've seen no impact on my profitability whatsoever. And we walked into the paint shop and into the mixing room to have a look what was happening. And my guy wasn't lying to me. They were using a third less paint, but do you know what? They were mixing exactly the same amount they were before. So now all they were doing was throwing it away and getting an extra charge to have the waste paint taken away.
It's funny you say that.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and the other thing that I always looked at when I looked at my bills, and we go through our P&L, right, that profit and loss statement. I always looked at my waste thinner and the number of gallons of waste thinner I go through. And the reason why I wanted to go look at that, because you buy this big 55-gallon drum, right? You use it to go clean and then you also have the waste container that you pour out the surplus, right? Because you have to dispose of it properly. So you look at that hazardous waste removal fee, and that would tell you very quickly. And that's one of I think a real world scenario, right? Real quickly, go look at that bill. They were using less, like you said, they were using less product, but they were dumping it out, so you were spending just as much money.
Absolutely.
And you can find that by just looking at hazardous waste removal. I mean, how much is it costing you to get rid of that waste? And when you find out that you're going through like 3 55-gallon drums in a month, guess what? You're throwing a lot of product away.
Yeah, absolutely. And how much they're buying to how much is getting taken away. Because again, what you're taking away that you haven't purchased is top quality paint in that being disposed of. And how many people have got, one of the advantages of the waterborne paint, it doesn't go off. So, use that to base up another job. It doesn't have to be exactly right. But like you said, where you've got a poor covering colour, base it up in that job first, and you can mix a tiny amount and get the colour exactly right after it. So, again, they're small tips. You have to do a bit of work. You have to embed them in your SOP in the way that you said. But actually, going from a good shop to a great shop in terms of profitability is about doing lots and lots of these little things. Fortunately, there are very few magic bullets out there. It's about putting in that effort, grooving the sling, and keeping it going throughout the shop.
Well, and you make the analogy to the golf, right? And getting that groove swing. the thing that's interesting about it, and I'll make that analogy back, and I think every shop owner is going to nod their head, including yourself, is that practice. If you don't go practice the golf swing, you're never going to groove it. You're not going to get better. And when you start talking about all these little improvements, you know what? You're gonna teach it to your staff. You're going to try and implement it, and guess what? You're going to reteach it, and you're going to continue to reteach it because you have to build the muscle, right? Yeah. And you replace people and you change people. One of the things that's interesting, and I'm going to ask this, is you started to do that consultative side and then came into Audatex and working with the shop management, is they start to make these little things in a real world situation in a lot of the shops that you've been in. What type of impact do you think they can expect by making some of these minor changes? Are we talking about a couple of percentage points to the bottom line for them? What do you kind of see when you go out and start to work with shops to implement many of these small little changes?
We work on very, very tight margins in the UK, and that's more from ignorance about your margins in across the water rather than implying
they're the same. They're small. They're small. Okay, too. Yeah.
So I took a profit and loss of a small customer that I've got a really good relationship with, and it's fairly typical. He's a decent sized shop and 35 jobs a week. He's on a reasonable labour rate for the UK. He's making 57% on his labour, 15% on the OE parts, and a really positive discount on his paint. I won't say what. I wouldn't set the hairs running, but so not a bad shop. 5% net profit, 35 jobs a week. That's 83 pounds a job. Bottom line profit for £151,000 a year. So should we go through an example and just alter a couple of things in his shop and see what difference it makes, John?
Sure, let's do that.
Okay, so we talked about having documented processes, and of course that will give us a reduction in rectification as well as making other savings.
Yeah,
and keeping the So I don't know, how much do we reckon we could get on average per job doing that?
Well, it's a great question. As you start to do that, I think you're seeing a couple of, and really we got to look at how we measure the impact. If we do it on dollars, right?
Yeah.
Even if I'm just dealing with do it on dollars. I mean, I think we're going to see anywhere between $3 to $15 of improvement just by just on the little things. And we talk about the little ones. It's the nuts and bolts. It's the corrosion. It's the cue pads. It's the little things that get overlooked that can add up to almost $15, maybe even $20. So would you agree or disagree with that?
I think you're being conservative. When we have a look at this broken down into areas, and you're right, we're talking about small things, and let's keep it conservative. But we document our processes. We get less rectification. Can we save $1 a job there? I'm sure we can. We've talked about protecting the accuracy of the estimate. We're missing a couple of dollars of parts on there, and now we want to get the labour, so we're missing perhaps another $1 on labour on average per job.
Yep.
Are we making sure that our invoicing is 100% accurate? So we're perhaps missing a buck on average on each job there, and then actually we're making sure we buy better, and it's not a huge saving, but we're going to make another 20 cents there. And then we're going to make sure the communication with the customer's right. We're going to make sure the hire is charged out correctly, or we get a commission. We're perhaps going to make another 50 cents there. And then we're going to keep the productive in the way that I said earlier. And we're just going to improve their utilisation by 1%. So it's not really significant. We've been very, very conservative there. But those changes add up to 14. I'm using pounds, forgive me.
That's fine.
I'm British, but £14 per job.
Yeah.
So if you remember, we were making £83 a job, 5%.
Mm-hmm.
Net profit, 35 jobs a week. It's going to give us a profit of about £151 £151,000 a year. And all of a sudden, we've gone up to 6% and we're making £97. We made nearly 177,000 or nearly an extra £26,000 profit.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
if we go back to if we hadn't made those changes, but we wanted to earn an extra £26,000 profit, we would have had to have processed an extra 307 vehicles in that year.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And that's not easy to do. It is absolutely amazing. Like you said, we've been conservative there, looking at just a handful of changes that makes a big difference to the profitability of the job.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that you bring as you go in a shop. You start to go run, their prior month estimates and start to go show these things, and you can gain that. Where some shops you're going to see a little higher, some may see a little smaller. It just depends on some of the skill that they have and what training that they've done. But I think it's a great example that you put together. One of the other things I was going to really ask you about, because of the fact I've been in the States and I've had the shops in the States, and I don't know how much time you may have spent in the States. I've done very little abroad. I've been in Madrid and a few other places at the shops. But what do you feel, or do you know what the kind of major differences are between what we how we operate in the U.S. versus the UK? Is there really that significant difference? It sounds as you and I have spoken here today that there's such commonalities. I'm curious if there's any really major differences between the two marketplaces.
So, and I have been over to the States, and I've looked at a few shops there, and probably unsurprising, like you said, there's a huge amount of commonality. But over in the we're still going through the process of, we're probably a little bit behind in terms of the process of consolidation. So, we've got only one major group with over 100 shops, albeit we're a much smaller country, but we're seeing the regional shops with anybody from kind of 3 to up to 20 shops are growing. And they're kind of typical mom and pop shops that have grown into pretty sophisticated businesses now. We've got some very odd things that go on in the UK. So we have virtually no kind of cash settlement in lieu of the insurance. The insurance pays for around about 80% of all of the bodywork in the UK. Okay. But it makes a huge difference whether that's the policyholder's fault or the third party fault. So many insurance companies will process under their own claim strategy. They'll process a job if their policyholder's at fault, and what they want to do is just drive down the cost of the repair, which inevitably makes it much more difficult for a body shop to make a sustainable profit, particularly all the things that we'll see both sides of the pond. We talked about ADAS earlier, technology on vehicles, skill shortage, making sure we train everybody up, inflation in parts. But if the job is actually one that the insurance company has captured, but it wasn't their policyholder's fault, under the law of subrogation here, they're actually allowed to charge that repair back to the at-fault insurer at a retail cost.
Oh,
they actually make a profit. I don't know, is that the same for you guys?
Yeah, subrogation kind of handles the same here. I think, what's interesting is obviously there's legislation's a little different in every country, but right now in the States, there's a huge focus on documented OE procedures and OEM position statements. So the manufacturers are coming out with these position statements, and they're also now going down the path of their own certified repair networks. So, so that's kind of what we see here in the States. Sounds like you guys have gone through more of that, I think, in the UK prior to the States, but I can be wrong. Is that fair?
No, I think that's really accurate. So our process is documented processes here we call methods. They can either be Thatcham based, which is an organisation owned by UK insurance industry or funded by the UK insurance industry, or OE or vehicle manufacturer methods. And we've got very adept at being able to integrate those into the assessment. So yeah, we're in the same space there. Of course, steering. I believe steering is legal in some states and frowned on in other states. Is that right?
I think it's illegal in all states.
Okay.
Yeah, they really.
So here it's the de facto.
It's the de facto.
So
okay.
Virtually a huge proportion of the crash repair work is actually steered to a network that the insurance company has recommended and put together.
Yeah.
And obviously you'd like to say some of that's about making sure that their policyholder gets the right standard of repair and the right standard of customer experience, but it wouldn't take a genius to work out that it's also about mitigating costs. And interestingly, there was a case in the last couple of years, I believe, involving a Honda, which was in a secondary collision after it had been repaired badly. Mm-hmm. And there was a fire, I think, the roof had been bonded.
It was bonded versus welded, in the States. You're talking about? Yeah, in Texas. Yeah.
That made a lot of headlines over here for our industry as well, because it really does just drive home how critical it is to have those methods correct when you're doing the vehicle. So, yeah, it sounds like it's probably more commonality than differences, Don.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Well, look, Gethyn, I want to thank you for joining our podcast today, because we're coming to the end here, and I love hearing from you outside of the U.S., from folks outside of the U.S., and what you guys are paying attention to and what kind of happens in your circle. So I want to thank you for the conversation, because I truly enjoy talking to you. And just as a personal note, I love the accent, right? And you don't feel you have it, but I could sit and listen to you speak all day long. So I really enjoyed talking to you today. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning in to the Solera Innovation Lab. And they can visit us on the web and follow Solera on social media. We want to look for more features like this. So if you have any questions for a host, we'd love to hear from you. So don't be shy. And again, Gethyn, thank you for being a participant today on our show.
It's an honor. Thanks very much.
Solera Innovation Labs is a podcast produced by Solera, a global leader in data-driven solutions and services. Solera collects and translates complex data into actionable insights for automotive, identity, and property partners across 90 countries and counting. Learn more at solera.com or find us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.